Madam Sola, can you talk on behalf of Dr. Neil, please? Madam Sola, are you there? Okay, so I think we can go on. I can see that both of them are not there. So I would like to introduce you to our moderator today. Our moderator is Mr. Bernard Ogalo, who is a teacher of literature. Yeah, there is the photo of Bernard. Please share the screen of the bio. Yeah, Bernard is a teacher of English and literature, creative writer and editor. He's also a specialist in education in emergencies. He has also written the book that is called Forgive Me, Sunita, and he has also contributed in several anthologies where I've also done 2 of them with him. Welcome, Bernard. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was muted. So thank you for the introduction, and I want to welcome everyone to this webinar. I would also like to recognize the President IELTA.
Yeah,
and
he has actually joined. He has actually joined, yes. So you can ask him to talk.
Yeah, kindly, please, you kindly, Chair, I request you to go ahead and introduce the president before I take over.
All right. Dr. Neil Alvaro, welcome to the forum. Please go ahead and welcome the participants. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. For all the participants who have attended, we thank you for taking your time to be with us, and we hope that by the end of this one now, we all are going to leave this webinar better than we came in, better educators, better people. So I would like to take the shortest time so that we can start our webinar. And I would like to introduce us to our presenter today, our speaker. So Mr. Byatta is a TSC employed teacher of English and language and literature at Butere Girls High School. Butere Girls High School is in Kakamega County. Is currently pursuing his master's degree in curriculum and instructional technology at Masinde Muliro University of Science and Technology. Mr. Byatta, feel welcome, and we appreciate that you're taking your time to share your knowledge and experience with us. Before we welcome, should there be anyone who has any question, please, we will take questions at the end of the presentation. We will have our question and answer session after the presentation. Thank you. So, our speaker, please go on. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introductions. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said, once more, good evening.
Good evening, thank you.
Good, like it has been said, my name is Byatta. Byatta is a practicing teacher. I wish to take the shortest time possible, even though it's programmed 40 minutes, so that we collectively look at the question of student-centered learning in the English language classroom. I've not been following up, most of the presentations, so I may want to take my own approach, and then at the end of the day, we'll compare notes.
It's okay, thank you.
I don't know whether Bernard is on, so that you help me display the slides.
We had one of us who was helping with us. Madam Immaculate, I'm not sure if you're in.
Yeah, she's sharing.
This is, the time is yours.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, in the meantime,
Yes.
I think I may want to give some brief introduction to our topic of concern today. I'm a specialist of curriculum. That's my second master's degree after I had done some literature elsewhere. Then I felt like I want to get back to interact with the actual practice in class and just try finding out what exactly is the relationship between the learner, the environment, the teacher, and the external environment, in this case, the stakeholders of our school. Now, in my presentation, maybe the first slide, the first one, the very first one up there. Good. Our concern today is to look at the student-centered learning in
Yes. Hona Michael, are you still with us? Hello. Mr. Byatta, I'm not sure if you can get me. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, I can
And do
hear
anyone
you.
else?
I think Byatta, we can't hear Byatta.
Maybe he has a technical issue. Seems to have. I hope he resolves it in the shortest time. In the meantime, should there be any one of us who has a question just from the beginning of this webinar, because we are doing student-centered learning in English language classroom, and basically we're talking about the approach. It's these are the pedagogies. It's the way we handle English language classrooms. And then he's looking at student-centered learning. You're moving away from teacher-centered kind of approach, whereby now we want to do things based on what the students understand, so that they can also share with us, even as the educators. I'm not sure if our speaker is ready.
Yeah, I am ready.
So good. Thank you. Thank you. Go on. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, I had said, sorry for the interference. I had said that our concern today look at the student-centered learning away from the subject-centered, where we consider so much on the content that is structured and pre-planned, away from the experience-centered, where we look at the content in practice, away from the problem-centered, where learning goes on based on a particular problem, and the moment the problem is solved, that's the end of the process. So in this case, our concern is look at the student-centered, and as we do so, I wish to mention a few items or steps as far as the background is concerned, that for learning to take place in a well-structured environment, that of a classroom in a school setup, basically we rely on a number of resources. We look at the teacher, we look at the end user of the learning process, the child or the student or the learner in class. We look at the environment within which learning is taking place. And the curriculum as prepared by KICD through the Ministry of Education, they all play a role, so that at the end of the day, if for one to say that learning has taken place, as looking at the way curriculum is designed, from the development of curriculum to the implementation of the curriculum.
Yes, sorry. Kindly let us all mute, kindly. Let's all mute so that we have, yes, please, sorry for that.
Sorry, was muting all. So unmute Bernard and the speaker.
Sorry, members, for that. So please, kindly, Mr. Byatta, go on.
Yeah, I was giving some background that when you look at learning in class, we consider so much the manner in which the curriculum is designed way back from the development of the curriculum by KICD to the implementation of the curriculum in the classroom, the teacher at the center as the implementer, and then the evaluation of the curriculum that advises the concerned stakeholders on when and how to do the revision of the curriculum. We are concerned about the delivery of instruction in a classroom setup. During the delivery of the instruction or the actual learning, we now want to look at, if you place the interest on the learner, what is the possible outcome? If you place the interest on the teacher as the all-knowing entity in the learning process, what is the outcome? If you place the interest on the environment of learning, what is the outcome in the backdrop of English language in that particular classroom setup? So in this case, I want us to shift our focus so much from the perspective of the learner in the actual instructional delivery in a classroom setup. How well should we approach it in the context of Kenya, or rather Africa as a whole, considering the training of the teacher, considering so many other philosophical factors, social factors, religion factors, the political in place, or the politics in place as we speak, considering the nature of the curriculum that we are struggling to implement, what we call CBC. That actually is more or less, it's 50-50, whether it will take off the way it's expected or otherwise. Those are the factors that we need to consider. So with all those I've said in mind, let's now look at the individual learner in a class. In the teaching and learning of English language, which is an acquired language, not our early one as it is. There is this scholar called John Dewey, who has done a lot of foundational research on matters curriculum. And he did a number of statements. I wish just to quote a few of them, in the sense that he says, or rather he noted, that the curriculum should be tailored to the child's own experiences, needs, and interests. Thus, a child learns how to comb, to brush his or her teeth, to bathe, because the child needs to have good personal hygiene. In this case, for learning to take place, maybe we can get to the next slide, slide number 2. For learning to take place, may I have the second slide? Slide number 2. Yes. Now, when we look at for learning to take place, the central individual in this case is the learner. And according to John Dewey, in the manner in which the curriculum is made, it places the child at the center, in the sense that the child's interests must be taken care of at the point of developing the curriculum, at the point of implementing the curriculum inside the class with the teacher's direction, at the point of evaluating the curriculum. All these 3 stages considers the needs, the desires, the interests of the learner vis-a-vis the market availability out there, vis-a-vis so many other psychosocial factors, the physical factors, the political factors, and what have you. Now, to that end, I may want to mention a few theories, particularly the psychological theory, what you call psychoanalysis, when you study the mind of a learner. And then in terms of learning, child-centered learning is tailored in a way that you don't just impose knowledge on the learner, because that becomes a teacher-centered. The learner is supposed, first of all, show interest. So this calls for a very sensitive teacher to understand the needs of this particular individual, to understand the interests of this particular individual, the learner in class, to understand the behavioral adjustments that at the end of the day, in terms of evaluation, we will confirm to the teacher that actually learning has taken place. I may want to borrow a leaf from the two systems that we've had in Kenya, CBC and the 844. Many scholars argue that 844 was more or less examination oriented. And so basically learning was taking place, but it was more or less rote learning. The learner is made to cram in order to reproduce the same materials at the evaluation level, as opposed to CBC, where the learner is subjected to different learning experiences in class. And then as the learner progresses from one level to another, from grade 3 to the middle primary to the junior secondary, all the way to the senior secondary to the university, there's a lot of specialization based on the interests of the learner, based on the ability of the learner, based on the needs of the learner. And in this case, learning is said to take place because as the learner progresses from one level to another, from where the teacher sits, the teacher is able to assess and advise, involve the parent, involve the rest of the stakeholders that are concerned about the learning process, so that at the end of the day, we have a very relevant learner who is supposed to fit in the society and bring about the desired change and development. So learner-centered learning, or the student-centered learning, was a key consideration in the readjustment of the curriculum in Kenya, in the sense that the developers of the curriculum will sit and ask themselves, are we doing justice to the learners? Why is there a lot of school dropout? Is it because the curriculum is not giving us the desired outcome or otherwise? And then in the process, we have to keep adjusting depending on how relevant is the child after graduating from either whichever level, whether Form 4 or the tertiary colleges or the universities, as the learner goes on. Is the education system helping the learner become relevant to the society after going through the cycle? And so the biggest consideration in all those adjustments were the fact that the learner should be at the center of the learning process. Now we can narrow down to the classroom environment. Let's have the next slide, number 3. Good. In our slide number 3, we are looking at the features of learner-centered learning or teaching method. In this case, like I've said, the interest of the student or learner facilitates his or her learning. And of course, this calls for a highly trained teacher to be able to identify the interests of the student, to be able to tell that this student would wish to pursue this and not this, based on the needs, based on the interests, based on the mindset of the learner, based on the other factors that surround this particular individual or learner in a classroom environment and as a whole. So in this case, the interests are, of course, socially derived. The interest could be motivated by a stakeholder, like from the perspective of the parents to the child. It could be from the government's perspective, the school setup, the environment within which the learner is going through or subjected to the learning process. That environment matters a lot. If a school would want to evaluate the former cohorts, those students who graduated before in a secondary school setup, for example, that too is a determination of, we've had several students sitting KCSE in Butere Girls, for example. How are they placed outside the school once they graduate, once they sit KCSE? They are placed in different colleges and universities. How do they cope? And finally, they are placed in their different places of work. How do they cope? That line of development from right after high school all the way to when they begin giving back to the society is a very important factor in trying to see to it that learning is taking place in a school, in a region like a sub-county, in a county, in a country like Kenya, as you go on globally. and what have you. So the question of teacher training becomes very, very key, because for a teacher to be able to understand the needs, the interests of a learner, that teacher is supposed to consider so many other factors, seen and unseen. Now, aspect number 2 is that finding common interests and working together in terms of those unifying elements brings about growth in life-related skills in a classroom environment. If a learner is expected to learn direct from the resources available in class, the textbooks, the internet, or rather the computer resources, the colleagues, students, or learners in the same environment, there's a way, there's what you call enhanced learning, in the sense that in terms of morals, in terms of the general knowledge, in terms of the skills, in terms of the wholesomeness of the learner within the classroom setup, with or without a teacher, learning will still go on. And so our concern in this case is that how flexible is this particular design of learning, what you call student-centered learning, in terms of the support, in terms of the contribution of a teacher. There is a generalization that a teacher is expected to just give 25% of the expected instructional content to a learner. Then you leave the learner to generate, you leave the learner to derive the remaining 75 to 85% on his or her own. Then at the end of the day, we can confidently say that learning has taken place. But in the event that a teacher is the sole producer of knowledge, the sole generator of knowledge in a classroom setup, no learning is taking place. That little percentage given to a teacher, that 15 to 25%, is a clear justification that all the activities, all the events taking place in a classroom setup places the learner at the center of everything in terms of instructional delivery, in terms of the instructional process, all the way to evaluation. And so in this case, the teacher needs to know a greater deal about the growth and development of children and the youth. Regardless of the number of years the teacher has been in service. In a secondary school setup, a teacher handling Form 1, Form 2, Form 3, and Form 4 classes, there is a way the treatment of these individuals based on the age differences, based on the levels of exposure, based on the levels of attainment, the entry behavior, and what have you. A teacher is supposed to handle all these individuals supposedly differently. But in the process of instructional delivery, a teacher who teaches English at the introductory level, maybe say Form 1 class, a teacher gets to class, the first item under the reading skills is handwriting. And then a teacher is meeting learners who come from different backgrounds, from different primary schools, coming to school for admission in Form 1 with different levels of achievement, with different grades or marks. And so at the classroom level, a teacher is in class. A teacher wants to introduce handwriting as a skill. All these individuals are coming in with different ways of writing. The individuals are coming in with varied approaches to writing, or how to write. And so the teacher is supposed to gradually readjust to accommodate each one of them. And so changing the learner's handwriting is never easy, because there's a way the learner has been conditioned to write so. So in this case, the teacher is supposed to ensure that let each learner write the way she or he has been conditioned. And then with the time, the teacher will keep on adjusting all the way until they get to Form 4. And the best example here is, let me use the example of the reading scale, for example. In reading, there are students who read very fast during the loud reading lessons. There are students who read so moderately or averagely in terms of pace. There are students who read the slowest in class. But at the end of the day, the teacher is supposed to accommodate three different extremes in the same environment. And so that the slowest reader in a class If the teacher fails to understand that particular individual, no learning will take place. That average reader in class, the teacher has to understand that individual for learning to take place. The same applies to the fastest or the quickest reader in the same environment. And so at the end of the day, each learner must be accommodated. The instructional delivery processes must take care of these particular individuals. And so in the long run, we see the student-centered aspect that regardless of the extremities, regardless of the differences and variations, whether a student can write well or otherwise, a student can speak fluently or otherwise, a student can listen effectively or attentively or otherwise, they are all at the center of a 40-minute lesson of English in that Form 1 class. A teacher who is well conversant with all those variations, the point number 4 I'm trying to talk about is a teacher needs to know a greater deal about the growth and development of children and youth. In a classroom setup, there are so many individual differences. Before the teacher starts teaching, he is supposed to ensure that all those differences are harmonized for learning to take place. And as he does that, before he begins teaching, he is supposed to create an environment of learning, ensure that all these students are feeling the sense of belonging. All those individuals, they feel they are, taken care of wholesomely by that individual teacher. Then by the time learning begins taking place, each of those learners with all the many differences is placed at the center of the learning process. Now, I wish to draw, of course, I will skip the advantages of the learner-centered because I've mentioned them by passing. Let me get to slide number, the designs of the learner-centered method of teaching and learning. Designs of the learner-centered methods of teaching and learning. Under designs, of course, there are 4. I wish to say that learner-centered design is very collective and wide, but it can be looked at or looked at into the 4 progressively. The first one is what you call the child-centered design. And the child-centered design is what I've dealt with broadly. It places the wholesome, the life of the learner at the center in a classroom setup. In the sense that as the teacher is teaching, the teacher is supposed to take care of the senses of the learner, the psychological setup or mindset of the learner, the physical dressing of the learner, the relationship of one learner to another or to the rest in a classroom environment, the interests of each individual learner, the needs, whether seen or unseen, the belief system, considering the backgrounds of that particular individual. And so all these considerations ideally places the learner at the center. And any other teacher coming to class, whether he's a teacher of CRE, English, mathematics, agriculture, business studies, computer, all those individuals are expected to take care of or to place the learner at the center in for we to say that learning is to take place, learning is taking place, learning has taken place, or learning will take place for purposes of learning. And so child-centered, the child-centered design places the learner at the center. And then item number 2, maybe still on the child-centered, I wish to use the example of the English paper 3, the literature. The literature aspect of learning, of course, under language, brings on board the creativity and imaginations of the learner in a classroom environment. In this case, for a learner to creatively participate in a learning process, that cannot happen if the learner is not feeling fully taken care of, the learner is not feeling the sense of belonging, the learner is not being appreciated by the teacher, whether by motivation, intrinsic, extrinsic, and otherwise. And so in literature, for example, a teacher is going to form 3 class, you want to introduce the concept of themes in one of the set texts, let me say The Samaritan by Lara, and then you want to connect the events in a story to the realities outside the classroom with the learner at the center, such that the learner is made to see what is in the story, to see issues or episodes as discussed in a given story, relate those written issues to the real life experiences outside the class. For that to take place, a teacher must have understood this particular learner in terms of the interests, the needs, and all other factors that concerns the human life in that particular classroom at the child level. Now, that therefore takes us to our second design, what we call the experience design. In the experience-centered design is where we want to look at this learner is in class. Before the learning or before the lesson begins, this child has come with several other experiences from the outside world in terms of socialization, in terms of parenting, in terms of the religious upbringing, in terms of the child's interaction with other children of the same age or otherwise. And so the experience-centered design in this case, therefore, the teacher must be able to relate what does the learner know vis-a-vis the introduction of the new knowledge for that particular lesson, considering the objectives as stated in the lesson plan, the objectives as guided by the schemes of work, the teaching notes, and all those other items that are meant to ensure that the lesson is successful. And so the teacher cannot take for granted the experiences of a learner before she or he begins the lesson. The teacher should not assume that this learner has an empty head. The teacher should not assume that this learner does not know anything. At the beginning of a lesson, there is something that the learner knows. And so the teacher has to slowly introduce the topic or the subtopic of the day, the new knowledge of the day, from a known to unknown point of view, from the realities in the class, from the experiences that the child might have interacted with. As the teacher introduces the new knowledge in that classroom, the learner is still at the center, in the sense that the experiences of a child at the age of 14, I think the teacher knows. At the age of 18 or 17 in Form 4, that is still at an advanced level. The teacher must put that into consideration at the onset of the lesson. In this case, the learner is still at the center, considering one, the interests and the needs in the child-centered design, or the experience of the child as the teacher begins the lesson. That can be taken for granted. Aspect number 3 is what we call romantic or radical centered design. That as this learner is just about to begin the lesson, it's an English language lesson. I want to teach poetry. Or let me say, I want to teach a concept in some set book we used to teach sometimes back, Blossoms of the Savannah. In Blossoms of the Savannah, there is a thematic concern, a practice we call female genital mutilation, FGM, which is a practice by some communities and not other communities. In that particular lesson, I want to talk about FGM as a theme, as an event or an issue in terms of the thematic analysis of the different texts. There are students who don't practice FGM. And so I expect such students to be, to criticize that particular practice. I'm not supposed to impose knowledge, all that concerns FGM on that particular individual. Radical centered design is whereby you need to take care of the feelings, the belief system of that particular individual, slowly move with the mind of this particular learner, that as much as you don't practice this particular issue in this, as it is in this particular text, take it as it is for the sake of the examination, that actually it's a thematic concern in the context of blossoms of the savannah and not the outside world. At the end of the day, the teacher is supposed to look at, to romanticize the lesson so that these particular students that have different positions as far as some issues are concerned in those particular texts are well taken care of. At the end of the lesson, all students are supposed to be taken care of. And so the radical or the romantic centered design is meant to take care of students that have different views, different positions about the knowledge that is meant for that particular lesson from the teacher's perspective. If that learner is not placed at the center of the whole instructional process within the 40 minutes, no learning is going to take place. Learner-centered learning. Lastly, we have what we call humanistic-centered design. Humanistic-centered design is well manifested still in English paper 2, that concerns literacy. And in this case, it emphasizes on the potential ability of the learner with an intention to empower. Learning has taken place in a class. The essence of education is to empower, change the mindset, so that the human beings going through the education system at the 4-year course should be should fit or suit in the outside world after school. Now, in terms of morals, in terms of abilities, in terms of the receptive nature of the learner, the teacher must place the learner at the center. And in connection to the humanistic approach, the teacher should begin from creating a learning environment. That environment concerns the learner. It's the learner at the center so that learning is said to take place. 2, the teacher should respect the learner. The teacher should empathize or sympathize with different learners within the class, considering the different problems and challenges. If you look at the situation in Kakamega County, for example, most of the students are well endowed. Their facilities, the availability of teachers, the resources in terms of the physical infrastructure, the geography and the physical environment, they are good to go for learning to take place. You compare Kakamega County to Northeastern, Mandera, Wajir, or Garissa, some parts of Tana River, all the way to Kwale, then we all agree that these are two extremes. And for learning to take place, a teacher, whether in Kakamega or in Mandera, the two extreme ends should not affect learning. And so a teacher operating in Mandera and another teacher operating in Kakamega, the two students or the two learners are expected to sit the same national examination as the case in the 844 system. And so the learner should be placed at the center of learning, regardless of the physical environment, regardless of the social environment. Learning must take place. And so humanistic centered design is meant to, what is the output? What is the product? Can the learner fit, having gone through the learning process? Is the learner well empowered so that she or he should be able to bring the desired change in the long run, having gone through the learning process as it is? And so the humanistic approach stresses on the development of positive self-concept and interpersonal skills that are manifested gradually as the students graduate from one level of learning to the next level, as it were. Now, I'll ignore the advantages of all those, whether it is child-centered, humanistic, radical, as it is. My next concern is to do with the slide number, the next slide, yes, slide number 9, good. Now, looking at slide number 9, the reading skills, I want to narrow down to the nitty-gritties. How do we apply child-centered learning in an English language classroom? We understand that language or English, like any other language, has different skills. Basically, there are four. We have the speaking skills, listening skills, the writing skill, the reading skill. Then the four are usually taken care of by the rules of language, what you call grammar. Now, when you look at the reading skills, for example, which I'll basically dwell on because we can't discuss all those skills in one or in 40 minutes, rather in one lesson as it were. Now, when you look at the reading skills, for reading to take place in a classroom, it is still the learner at the center. In English paper 2, for example, where we test on the literacy, I wish to say that we test the learner's ability to read when handling all issues that concerns 101/2, English paper 2. In that paper, we usually test the learner's ability to read a comprehension, what you call a passage. We test the learner's ability to read an excerpt or an extract from a set text. And then we also expect the learner to either read and explicate or analyze a poem or an oral narrative with the view of answering the questions. Then finally, we have another section, section 4, question 4 of the paper, what you call grammar. Now, when you look at question 1, for example, the passage, if a learner is able to read a passage, like I've said, reading should be given the key place in the total scheme of teaching English language, because if a learner is able to read, then it's an indication that there is acquisition of knowledge. It indicates knowledge of the English language by the learner in terms of comprehension, that a learner can read for understanding. A learner can read for interpretation. In this case, a learner is interacting with the passage. And as that happens, when you look at what you call the Bloom's taxonomy of understanding a written text, there are different types of questions that the learner is supposed to handle after reading the passage. I'll briefly take you through towards the end of the presentation, the types of reading. Now, in this case, we expect the learner to read the whole passage, either using the scanning method, the skimming method, or the general, what you call the third reading, where the learner reads with an intention of paying attention to the nitty-gritties, the finer details, the meaning of a word, up to the use of the punctuation marks and what have you. Now, if a learner is able to read, and then we can say learning is taking place, because in the process of reading, the learner is internalizing. In the process of reading, the learner is able to relate the information in the text at hand with the realities outside, of course, with the 15% input or direction from a teacher. Reading as a whole gives the learner full control over words and patterns that she or he may come across during the reading process. And as the learner interacts with the words, with the patterns, with the sentence structures, in terms of meaning, in terms of application, learning is more or less taking place, because a learner coming across any new word in the process of reading, out of curiosity, she or he will want to find out what is the possible meaning of this particular word. And of course, we know that every word in English has more than 3 meanings. We may get what you call the connotative meaning, the contextual meaning, or the dictionary reference, what you call the dictionary meaning of that particular word. And so depending on the curiosity levels of the word, depending on how motivated the learner is, if all the factors for learning are taken care of, learning can still take place. If a learner is given a passage, the learner is asked to interact with the passage. The learner knows how to read, reading for understanding. In that case, there's quite a lot that can take place in the process of reading. There is what we call enhanced experience and intellectual development of the child. In the process of reading, the learner is having an experience. In that particular passage, there are characters. In the passage, there are issues that are being advanced in terms of thematic concerns, in terms of episodic analysis or development, in terms of the aspects of style, like dialogue or narration, depending whether it's a play or a novel, the nature of the text or what have you. And then intellectually, the learner gets informed. Intellectually, the learner is made to develop. In this case, reading as a skill is very key for learning to take place because it is the learner and the text. We may want to look at the experience of the learner, whether the learner was made to begin reading at the lower age.
Yes.
Or what have you. Hello.
Yeah. Yes, we can just please go on. We have lost you briefly. Go on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Learning too helps the learner in gathering news and acquiring knowledge of current affairs. In where I teach Byatta Girls, I joined that school in 2019, 2019, yeah, May. And then I introduced a program we call NIE, Newspapers in Education. Byatta Girls partnered with the Standard Media group, where the Standard Group supplies the school with the standard newspapers once per week, every Tuesday. And then in that program, students in the formative level, Form 1 and Form 2, we slotted on the timetable what we call a library lesson. So that every week, every class, or rather every stream of the Form 1 class and the Form 2 class must visit the library. When they get there, every student is given a newspaper for that particular week. The learner is made to interact with the newspaper from the first page to the last page, taking care of all the aspects of information within the paper. At the end of the reading, the learner comes out of the library with written notes, whether they are new vocabularies, new phrases, sentences in different contexts, the current information, the current affairs, and what have you. No teacher. It is the learner in the library with the newspaper. Then wholesomely, the learner, when the learner gets to class, such a learner is able to take care of what we call cloze tests. It's an item tested in English paper 1, question 2, where a learner is given a broken passage, and then within the broken passage, the learner is supposed to fill the gaps. Those passages are basically lifted from the newspapers, particularly from the current affairs. The learning has taken place. When setting English paper 2, we lift passages from newspapers. A learner has interacted with a newspaper dated 31st May 2024. On the top cover, there is a whole development of how the president's speech on the Madaraka Day in Bungoma. And then we decide to test that in our end of term exam. We want to find out, are these learners taking advantage of the resources in the library? They feel motivated to read even more because in the long run, they are interacting with the resources. They read without the input of a teacher. And then whatever knowledge they generate is equally tested at reading scale. And then still on that program of newspapers in education, the NIE, it encourages the learner to generate knowledge on their own. As they do so, they now put the knowledge, the skills acquired in class into practice. Note taking and summary writing, for example. Hello? Hello, Bennett, is something the matter?
You are loud and clear, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Just about 6 or so minutes, 7 minutes I'll be done. So I was talking about the reading skills, and we have different methods of reading where a learner is sometimes interacting with a passage, and then the learner is expected to quickly get the general idea from that particular passage by either looking at the title, the subtitles, the first and the last paragraphs, by simply scanning through with an objective of getting the language register of that particular comprehension or passage, with an intention of wanting to find out from what field is the passage lifted from, whether it is from agriculture, politics, ICT, name them. All these skills acquired in class in application, as it were. Now, maybe after that, slide number 10. Slide number 10. I wish to bring to your attention that there are several language skills that the learner is supposed to, place himself or herself at the center for learning to take place. When, for example, look at the basic vocabulary in a passage, in a poem, in a short story, a novel or a play, in a narrative, all these things places the learner at the center. Identification of synonyms and antonyms, words with similar meaning or opposite meaning, the learner is at the center because the teacher may not be able to know all the words that are synonymous in meaning or opposite in meaning. Expanding headlines in terms of creativity. You write a topic on the board. Every learner will develop, some imagination. And all these imaginations can be crafted into stories, can be developed creatively developed into stories, what you call compositions. And so the teacher has no control over the thought process of a learner, but she or he can only influence. So in terms of developing proverbs into paragraphs, that is still writing, explaining common processes, for example, simple instructions, giving direction, how to repair a bicycle puncture, for example. It's a process, a step-by-step account so that at the end of the day, we see the outcome. Writing a formal or informal letter. A student is asked to write an informal letter to the mother. It's the student who understands her relationship with the recipient of the letter. It is the child at the center of all this particular practice. Completion of given stories, particularly in the creative writing, or simply developing dialogues. It is the child at the center of all this. And then all these are aspects that for learning to take place, they concern a language. It's the learner at the center. With the little guidance from the teacher, learning will still take place, as opposed to the cases in maybe science subjects or mathematics, where the teacher is more or less, the teacher and the student are at the interplay. So that for learning to take place, the input of a teacher is very key. But in English or any other social science, it is a different story. No learning can take place unless the child is at the center of the whole instructional process as it is. Slide number 11, as I almost conclude. Number 11. Hello. Bernard?
Yeah, we can hear you. Let's have, I think she's checking.
Okay.
But you can see, yes.
The slide is on.
We are on. It's on. It's number 11. It's gone.
Thank you. I was talking about under still reading skills, the student-centered or learner-centered learning under reading skills. We have the reading process. When you're handling a poem in class, the teacher will make reference to the course book or the textbook, maybe on page 21. In Form 1, there's a poem called I Love You, My Gentle One. The teacher is supposed to let the learner interact with the poem, read the poem for understanding, let the learner identify the different poetic devices, like the persona, the subject matter, aspects of style, the sound devices, and what have you. And then for learning to take place, it is the learner to identify all those poetic elements in the presence of the other learners interactively. And then the teacher will simply make a conclusion by simply making a few statements. But the moment a learner is made to identify the use of metaphor, you are the milk in the Rubindi, which we drank on the wedding day. That comparison in the poem, if the learner is able to identify it, learning has taken place. Such a learner cannot forget that particular poetic item from that particular context, still under reading skills. Assuming it's a novel, the literature from 3 and 4. The teacher is to talk about fathers of nations. The teacher is to take the students through what we call characters and characterization. How to describe a character in a given context using either descriptive verbs or adjectives. And then the learner simply says that Professor Kimani is educated, and we can therefore say that he is knowledgeable or informed. Then the learner is able to illustrate that based on what is provided on chapter 3 of Fathers of Nations. Learning has taken place. It is the learner at the center of identification of the the items as taken care of in the objectives of that particular lesson, in the lesson plan, in the schemes of work and what have you. It is the learner at the center. Cases where teachers come and impose knowledge on the child, at the end of the day, no learning has taken place. As much as we call for aspects of interactive learning like group discussions, class presentations, simulations and what have you, it is the learner to initiate all these things with the guidance of a teacher. Like I said at the onset, 15% from the teacher, 85% from the learner. Learning has taken place. Now, reading is a process that needs preparation. Before a learner begins reading, like a poem, that learner is supposed to be prepared. And the learner can be prepared by either the learner himself or herself, the other learners in the classroom, the physical and emotional environment within the class. All these are supposed to be taken care of in readiness to learn, in readiness to read. At the end of the day, learning shall take place. There are different methods of reading. Because of time, I may not talk about all of them. But like I said, when handling a passage, we have skimming, we have scanning, we have read, recite, and review alongside the questions attached to that. I think that can be a story for another day. In our slide number 12, I think I've talked about that. Slide number 13, that concerns the loud reading and silent reading. I've mentioned that passively by passing. And then I wanted to say something about the learner-centered learning in literature class, particularly to the adult students in Form 3 and Form 4. Slide number 14. This concerns how we prepare students in literature. Like I said before, in literature, it is the student to interact with the text, the set text, whether a play, whether a novel, whether a short story, whether it's a narrative, whether it's a poem, or what have you. The interaction of a student and the text is determined effectively by so many factors in play. In this case, when exposing students to the set text for the first time, it is the learner at the center. There are issues in those texts that could be said to be high level. There are issues that could be said to be manageable by the learner. But for literature classes to be effective, the learner must interact with the set text as many times as possible. Every time I go to class, I tell my students, if I have a class of 60 learners in Form 3, we are reading a chapter in Fathers of Nations, I expect 60 different interpretations of the same chapter, implying that the way a learner understands the contents in a chapter is totally different from the way another learner will be able to interpret or understand that particular chapter. Now, the teacher will simply come in and give a common ground from the 60 different interpretations. Now, this is the direction. For learner to take place, every learner has his or her way, approach or reading process in terms of how to analyze simple concepts, in terms of the themes, the aspects of style, in terms of characters and characterization, in terms of the general flow of events, what you call plot and what have you. All these things put together, if the learner is not at the center of the instructional process, no learning is taking place. Literature is very interactive. Literature mirrors the society. These are the knowledge centered, the experience centered that this learner has come to class with. In that chapter 1, we are talking about, for example, chapter 3 of Fathers of Nations, where Professor Kimani is being abandoned by the wife. Asi Omondi, then the wife is going for a newborn Walombe, who is an MP because of the economic differences. By so doing, then the learner is going through a family, a very sensitive concept of the family, divorce. That learner has a background, maybe the parents separated. Maybe the learner has very close relatives that are victims of that particular circumstance. The way that learner will interpret that particular part or that episode in that particular story is different from another student whose parents are together. The student is well provided for, and such a student is socially mature enough to handle such issues as another student who is a victim of that particular circumstance. For learning to take place, let all these learners interact with the text, interpret the text, air out their interpretation with the rest of the learners in class. In the process of discussion, either at the group level or as a class, learning is likely to take place, as opposed to the teacher comes in. Today we are looking at Fathers of Nations. In chapter 1, we have the theme of education. These are the illustrations. Write them down. The teacher gets out of the class. 40 minutes are done. No learning has taken place. The learner does not interact with those particular concepts from that particular text, as opposed to if the learner is made to identify and see those aspects by himself or herself. I had quite a lot to talk about listening skills, speaking skills, and the reading skill, particularly for paper 1, the oral skills. But in the best interest of time, I'll wish to give some time. We get reactions and then we conclude.
Thank you so much, Mr. Michael Byatta, for taking us through this very informative session. And it's clear that you actually have a strong grasp of what the student-centered learning entails, especially in an English classroom. So because we do not have a lot of time, I only noticed that now we've got we have members who've interacted with us in our chats. Stanley Sakala from Zambia, you indicate you're such a very good teacher. Yeah, and that one also actually confirmed. Thank you. You have Antaki. Would you please?
Bernard, are you still there? I think we lost him. Members, if you have any questions, feel free. You can raise up your hand or put on the chat box. Okay, I can see one from Dr. Ali. How jigsaw reading may be implemented in the classroom. How can we implement jigsaw reading? Immaculate, you can respond to that.
I can see Tololupe has raised her hand, and Tololupe has raised the hand. I want to believe maybe it's the answer to this one. So maybe Tololupe can go first, then I will try and answer how jigsaw reading can be implemented in the classroom.
All right.
Kindly unmute yourself, Tololupe. Tololupe.
Good evening. Please, I want to ask a question. I'm not answering that question. Hello?
It's okay, no problem. So
Thank you.
for jigsaw reading, it's okay. For jigsaw reading, a teacher can implement it in the following way. You get a whole comprehension passage, break it down into pieces, give each piece to a particular group, then let them come up with, let them form their opinions. Then when the whole class gathers together, they can be able to share what their passage was all about. Then the rest of the class will also do the same. And at the end of the day, you would have been able to go through the whole comprehension with each group contributing towards the same comprehension passage. Yes.
Okay. We have another question from Esther. Who or what is the key determinant or a successful learning-centered approach? Our speaker, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still connected.
Yeah, we have some questions for you. Who is the key determinant or a successful learning-centered approach? Then we have also on newspapers in education, what are the steps you followed? I have been trying to institute the same, but have had much headway. Then that's the same question. So you can answer those two.
Okay, thank you. The key determinant in learner-centered approach or design is the learner himself or herself, in the sense that for learning to take place, or for learning to be said to have taken place, and then all the interests, the needs, the desires of the learner must be taken care of. The teacher should go out of his way or her way to psychoanalyze the mind of the learner. The teacher should go out of his way or her way to assess the learner in terms of the preparedness, in terms of availability of learning resources, in terms of the receptive nature of the learner. And so the learner is at the center of the whole thing. And you know, learner-centered learning is interactive in the sense that if a learner cannot speak in class, if a learner is not listening attentively, if a learner is not reading, if a learner is not writing, and then there is a problem. So all these, places the learner at the center. For the newspapers in education program, I think it's a partnership between the Standard Media Group and the KTN News. Have my number, then I can link you to an individual, depending on which county or sub-county you are, and then you will get the necessary support. It's a partnership between the printing house, Standard Media, and your school for purposes of education for learning, education, newspapers in education, for that matter. And the goodness with this program is that Standard Media periodically, prints examinations for different classes. Like you may realize on a Thursday, maybe they are doing agriculture. Next week, Tuesday, you will have questions from home science. And so all these, the learner is able to interact, answer the questions. Sometimes they do imaginative writing, there are competitions. That is the Daily Nation. And what have you. So it's a whole learning process, but I'll get you the direction, I think, privately.
Okay, I can say we can take maybe the last question because our time is up and we still have to issue certificates. So I can take a question from Tabs. How can differentiation be done in class in regards to learners' ability and within the 40 minutes of the lesson?
Thank you for that question. I think this now comes down to the competency of the teacher. Because handling a class of 65, you don't expect the students to behave the same. That's why sometimes teachers are encouraged to go beyond just being a teacher. A teacher is expected to behave like a parent, sometimes a preacher, sometimes a counselor. a teacher is supposed to be all round, so that as the teacher is doing the instructional delivery, doing the instructional process, every learner is supposed to pay attention. And the moment a learner digresses, the moment a learner loses focus, a teacher is supposed to tell. And of course, there are so many factors that comes into play, whether psychological, social, economic, all those put into consideration. The teacher is able to tell that these learners' abilities this way, these learners' abilities this way, and then in collaboration with the other stakeholders, the other teachers on the compound, the parents on board, those things are sorted out. In a classroom setup, 40 minutes, learner differentiation. The teacher is supposed to be careful enough to tell that all the learners are on board throughout the lesson. And of course, there are different approaches depending on the competency of the teacher. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Teacher Michael. That was a really wonderful session. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it and learned a lot. So at this time, I welcome Mary, who is our learning researcher, coordinator official, to issue the certificates to our speaker and the moderator. Mary, are you there? Mary, are you there? Uh-oh. I can see she says her network went off. I don't know whether Immaculate, you're able to share the certificates, the screens, please. Meanwhile, as we wait for the certificates, I've seen Austin Odror, thank you so much for joining. You can say a word. Austin has been our leader in the LPAC, our Nairobi Association English Teachers Professional Association. Austin, I think he has also left. Isaac, please say something as we sort out the certificate issue. Coach Isaac.
Yeah, thank you, Margot. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed and I've learned a lot. A wonderful teacher who has given us the 21st century skills on delivery in classroom. And also he has experience the wide range of resource or reference materials. I believe that once maybe this is shared, we can be able to digest and see how best we are able to, tailor-make and use the same in class, depending on the various needs of our learners. I truly appreciate and look forward to more such sessions. Thank you, Margot. Thank you, Bernard. The session was good.
Thank you so much, Isaac. I can see Mary is back. Mary, kindly take over and issue certificates as we wind up. Then I'm also sharing a link on the chat box, so you can copy it and fill after the session is over. Mary, welcome. Mary Nguru, are you there?
Hello.
Hello, yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I had some issues with my network and I'm glad that I am back. So let me just start by introducing myself and say that my name is Mary from IELTA, Kenya, a teacher of English. And I am glad that we have been in this part of this enriching learning process together. Thank you very much for being with us. I want to take this opportunity to appreciate our speaker for today, Bryant Michael, for his insightful contribution in our webinar. And I hope that we shall be able to interact with him in future, have another chance so that you can get to learn more from him. I want to present this certificate to Michael for his contribution. Please share the certificate, Margot. Is it there with you? Margot?
Yes, I'm trying to.
Yeah, please share the certificate.
Uh-oh, not able to, so you can just finish up without us sharing.
Okay, so Michael, we are grateful for sharing your knowledge and your time with us. Thank you very much. The certificate is here. You are going to get it. In fact, we have learned so much today in this webinar. Learning has taken place. May God bless you so much. I also want to appreciate our moderator for the webinar, that is Bernard Ogalo. And you're also going to receive your certificate. It is not available at the moment, but you are going to get it. It is there. And we have really appreciated moderating this webinar. Thank you so much. And may God bless you too. Back to you, Irene.
Thank you so much, Mary. And sorry for that technology hitch. And I'm really happy that members are here. I can't finish without thanking Immaculate, who has been behind the tent. She's been taking care of the screen sharing and admitting members and muting any member that makes noise. So thank you so much, Immaculate. Thank you all for joining. And it's a wrap up. Happy Madaraka Day to the Kenyans. May you enjoy as you wind up. So at this juncture, I ask Maximilia, who is our Vice President, to finish up with the word of prayer. Then we can wrap it up.
Thank you.
Maximilia? Mary, you can take over. Just finish up with the word of prayer.
Okay, thank you. Our dear Heavenly Father, we come before you with thanksgivings and praises in our hearts. Thank you, Jehovah, for guiding our meeting. Thank you for your being with us. I pray that Jehovah God Almighty, you are going to bless each and every member. I pray that Jehovah God Almighty, that you are going to help us grow more, that we learn more, we share our knowledge with one another so that we can help our learners in their classes. Be with all of us in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. I do pray, Lord, trusting and believing.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, everyone. Amen. Make sure you fill up the
Thank you too.
The survey link. It's on the chat. Let me send it again for those who had not seen it. Have a lovely evening. Good night for those who are at night. Yeah, thank you. We shall have our fourth webinar series next month, first Saturday of the month at 8 p.m. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can open up your